I'm Damon Clinkscales. I'm the founder of Austin on Rails, original founder anyway. And I am still here. Still standing here. 10 years later, almost. But I'm glad to have you all here. We are going to have an awesome meeting tonight. We've got 2 talks. The first one, we're going to have a beginner talk on React and using React with Rails. And the second one is going to be Diane over here. She's going to talk about continuous deployment. So that's going to be fun. But basically, the way this works is we do announcements and welcome. That's what this first part is. And then I might have an announcement. You guys might have an announcement, whatever. And we'll go through that, and then we'll have the beginner talk, and then we'll have a break where we'll kind of we'll do a raffle. I've got 2 books. Eloquent JavaScript. Ooh.
Nice. This is a little too thick.
You don't do JavaScript? Everybody's doing it, haven't you heard? And then this is crafting Rails for applications, which we still need this. Rails 5 is kind of new. But anyway, Jose Valim, is he still a core committer? He was.
He has access.
He has access. So anyway, Jose Valim, how to do expert Rails 4 stuff. So pretty good books we've got. So we'll do a raffle, and then we'll do a who's looking and who's hiring that we do right in the middle. So if you're trying to find engineers or you're trying to find a great job, we'll gather over here off to my right and let you guys find each other. Okay, so I guess, does anybody have any announcements that they want to make, like Rails related, Austin Tech community related, upcoming events? Yes, ma'am. Nola.
Next Monday is Austin Ruby Group. Topic to be determined.
Next Monday, Austin RB. Topic TBD. Does anyone have a topic for Austin RB? Sounds like they could use some help.
Programming.
They do that every time. I don't know if you've ever been to Austin RB, but they do kata. They do a code kata every meeting. You pair up with someone and then everybody solves the same problem. It's kind of cool. Okay, anybody else? Other announcements?
I got one.
Caleb.
Keep Ruby Weirder, October 23rd.
Yeah!
October 23rd. Keep Ruby weirder. I just keep adding ers every year. This will be the 2nd year coming up. So I have an announcement. So Austin on Rails has been run by me, but people have helped out a lot over the years through taking on meeting ownership. A lot of you in the audience have at one point either spoken or decided to run the meeting, find the speaker, sponsors. But I have asked for some help, some volunteers to sort of keep Austin on Rails sustainable. More permanent help than just ad hoc. So I wanted to ask the 3 that are going to help me out. We're calling the AOR Council. They're going to help me out going forward. So Tony Lewis, Bill Ballard, and Richard Stewart. There he is. So these 3 guys, we're going to share the work of making sure Austin on Rails happens every month. We still need your help. We need you to find us speakers, sponsors, etc. But these guys are going to help. They're longtime Rails members of the community, and they're going to help make sure there's good continuity as we go forward. So really excited to have them on and appreciate their help. So let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you.
And thank you, Damon, for all of your tireless work.
Yes, sir. Thank you. appreciate it. All right, now that we've had that love fest, and you got to witness it, you were here, and it's on live stream. Oh man, we're going to go forward with the talk unless anyone else has anything else they want to throw out. Okay, so Shah is going to speak to us about React. Basically, he went through like a bunch of topics, and we were like, "What should he talk about?" He's like, "I don't know. We'll figure something out." I'm like, "Well, React sounds really interesting." He's like, "Cool. I'll learn React and I'll make a beginner talk." I'm like, "Sweet. That sounds awesome. Could you please do that now?" And he did. So here he is. Shah. Thanks. Here you go.
Well, all right. Can you all hear me? All right, awesome. All right, cool. Okay, so the talk is called Brief Introduction to Using React on Rails. And so I just want to talk about the structure of this talk. We'll be talking mostly about React and its design patterns. And afterwards, we'll talk about how to integrate it with your Rails application. We'll also be doing a lot of live coding. So if you want to go to that link right there, and there's links to GitHub repo as well as like some code dump or whatever, like a base code. And the link is again, so I'll give you guys like 10 seconds. And I'll put up the link later again if you guys need it. But all right, cool. So, all right, a little bit about me. I'm originally from New York City. I've been doing Rails for a few years now. I work for a company called Atlantic.net. We provide cloud infrastructure to small businesses as well as large institutions. So if you guys need any have any questions on that, you can ask me, and also do consulting for a lot of startups. All right, so before I talk about React, I want to talk about what React is not, because there's a lot of misconception. Has anybody heard of React before? Okay, has anybody used React before? All right, cool, awesome. So React is not a complete JavaScript framework. So a lot of people talk about React versus Angular or React versus Ember. And the truth is they're not mutually exclusive, because React, I mean, it doesn't handle a lot of the things like your controllers, your models, and things of that nature. It's not a templating language. A lot of people think, because React has weird syntax, which we'll go over, that it's a templating language. It's also not an Ajax library, and it's not a Node.js framework. So, although it does work really well with Node.js, but we won't talk about that today. So what is React? It's a JavaScript library to help you build your user interface. It's only used on the view layer. So according to Facebook, who created React, they call it the V in your MVC. So like I said, it doesn't do routing, models, or controllers. It can be integrated with other JS libraries and frameworks. What it does is it re-renders your view, but it's fast because of what they have what's called a virtual DOM, and we'll talk about what that is. Also, one thing it does is it renders your view server side, which speeds up page load even more, and we'll see an example of that later today. So, virtual DOM. Has anybody heard of virtual DOM before? All right, awesome. So, a high-level overview of it is that it's basically a clone of your DOM in memory, because the regular DOM operations are pretty expensive. So every time you're using jQuery, you want to insert or update or find an element, it has to kind of go through the whole thing, and it takes a little bit of time. And so what they do is people at Facebook and Instagram, they decided to come up with this virtual DOM where they keep the DOM in memory, and then what it does is it does a diff. Whenever you make changes, it uses its own heuristics and algorithms to determine the most efficient way of updating the DOM. So which allows, I guess, they did like benchmark, and it's a lot faster than things like Backbone and Angular and other front-end frameworks. So this is a sample React code. It might look a little weird, especially if you can see on the render, there's HTML that's inside your JavaScript. And as a Rails developer or any developer, that should throw like a red flag immediately, because you shouldn't be mixing HTML and JavaScript like that. At least that's what we were taught. But what it is that it's not actually HTML. It's using JSX, which what it does, it converts the HTML into JavaScript. Sorry, hold on. what it does is it converts the JSX, that HTML into JavaScript. And so it just makes it's syntactic sugar, so it makes it a little bit easier. You could also use something like React.createElement and write the JavaScript yourself, but I think it looks better with JSX. And if you think about it, JavaScript and HTML are generally intertwined. They're part of the same technology, the same front-end technology. So, okay. So we're going to talk about React components. So React is made up of different components. So these components are just state machines. So the basic premise is that you update the state, and it re-renders the DOM most efficiently based on your updated state. So to reflect that, and we'll see examples of how the components work in a bit. So to create a component, you create a component name, and then React.createClass, and you put in all your logic for your components. Usually you need to have a render function, which will render either HTML elements or another component. Because one of the things about React is that you could actually have multiple components, and it allows you to reuse a lot of these components to make your code a little bit easier to read. And yeah, so inside the JSX, to add JavaScript, you need to wrap them in curly braces. And we'll see an example of why that's needed. And also one little caveat, like you cannot use the word class to give a class name to your elements because it's a reserved word in JavaScript, so you need to use a class name. So there's an example, if you guys could see, div class name equals my div, whatever. Okay. Okay, so the second thing is React render. So this is the code that will render your element. It takes two arguments. The component name and the HTML comment is replacing. So, for example, if you want to render a comment box and you created a component called comment box, you would call React.render the comment box, and then you'd call the element that you're replacing or you're injecting the React component inside. And you could also pass props, which we'll talk about while rendering. This is an example. So you just do like comment box and then comment equals whatever you want to pass in, for example. And React has access to that. Okay, so this is our first live coding. If you guys want to, does anybody need the link to the?
Yeah, what's that link again?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you guys like 20 seconds to go to the link.
I tweeted it to Arson on Rails.
Okay. Yeah, so it basically it's just a gist with like 2 links, so it's nothing fancy. So the first link on your gist, it should be some basic. Actually, I need to 1 second. So this is a bare bones template of React. So. So if you guys paste it in, I'm gonna. Okay. Can you guys see back there, or do you want me to enlarge it?
A little bigger.
Bigger.
Is that good? All right, bigger. All right, so this is pretty straightforward. You include the React code, and you include the JSX transformer, which transforms your JSX into JavaScript, and then we're including jQuery if we need to use it. So for now, we're just going to do a simple hello world example.
So the JSX is the JavaScript and HTML looking thing.
Yeah, it's the JavaScript XML transformer. Yeah, exactly.
That's the JSX.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to stop and ask me. But we'll just do a simple hello world component. So this is how we create the first component. Okay, can you guys see the code? So hopefully this works because okay, this is just say first. Hello world. Okay, so we'll first run it and see if it works. Okay, so it's really simple. It's a hello world. It's like the first example. So we'll just go over this code right now. So first thing you're doing is you're creating the component, and it's rendering just the element h1 hello world, and you call hello world and you tell it to grab the content div or the element with the ID content, and you just replace or you inject this hello world component. Does this make sense? Okay, cool. Does anybody need to take a look? Are you guys good? I'll post all this stuff later on as well. I'll push some so you guys can take a look at it later. But okay, so that's the basics. First example. So I'm glad it went all right. Okay. All right. Yeah, we're gonna have a couple of these live coding examples. So the next thing we're gonna talk about is props. Props are properties that are passed from your parent component to the child component. And in order to access the props, you do this by going calling this.props and then passing the props name or .props prop name. So for example, if you had a component called gallery and you want to pass the color blue, when you render your component, you would do gallery color equals blue, and in order to access that color, you just do this.props.color. So if we go back to our example of the hello world, we could pass in a prop just to make it a little bit more dynamic. So instead of hello world, we'll do hello name. So and we pass in a name equals Austin or whatever. Okay, so hopefully this works. Oh, sorry. Oops. This is not. Okay. So does this make sense? What we're doing right now is we're passing this prop name equals Austin, and in our hello world component, we have access to that property via this.props.name. And because of this curly brace, we get to execute JavaScript inside. So that's pretty much what it's doing right now. And so if you change this to like hello John, it changes. So it's not too fancy, but it kind of gets the point of props across. So like, okay. Next thing we talk about is a state. So applications are obviously not static, and the state of applications change often. So unlike props, the states could be changed inside your component. And in order to access the state, you do this.state.state name. So, and in order to change the value of the state, you do this.setState, and you could change the value of whatever state you want to. So, do you guys understand the difference between state and props? Yeah? Anybody not a little confused? Okay. So, generally, Facebook React team recommends that you use props whenever possible, and state is only for whenever you want to change the data. Generally, the way you render the component is that you pass in props with it either via the React.render or via the other component that you're creating, and it also makes sense a little bit logically because you're passing in the value right there. So. Okay, now we're going to talk about the life cycle of a React application. So there are four major things we need to worry about. So there's a function called getInitialState. What it does is that it sort of sets the default state, default values for your state objects. So it's invoked before the component is mounted. So for example, if you had a comment box, right, and initially there would be no comments. So in your getInitialState, you set comment array to like just an empty array. Then the second part is a component will mount. This is invoked once right before the initial rendering happens. So it's like after you set the state, it's the first thing that it calls. And then the second thing is the component did mount. This is invoked once. Whenever it's rendered, it will call this action. This is where you want to put your AJAX calls and WebSockets or anything that you want to repeat. And then after to clean up your objects or your I guess the components, you need to call the component will unmount function, and it's invoked right after a component is unmounted from the DOM. So if you want to do some cleaning up, whatnot, you would need to call this, and we'll see an example of using all these pretty soon. So any questions? Are you guys good? All right.
What is the mounting? What does that mean exactly?
So mounting, it's like your component. Basically what you're doing is you're mounting the components, right? So it gets rendered every time. So the initial state is the first time before it's mounted, and then after because every time you change the state, for example, it will remount the component, right? So it's basically when it's being rendered. Make sense? So we'll see, once you see an example, it'll make a little bit more sense, I think. I think we have another live coding. So another live coding, we're going to create a simple ticker. So we'll take advantage of this, of the mounting and components and stuff. All right, so we could just go back and I guess you could just create the same blank thing. All right, so what we need to do is we need to have a ticker box, for example. Ticker equals dot. Okay, so state. Okay, so right now, because what we want to do is we want to create a simple ticker that will update every second. So obviously in the beginning, the time is 0. So this is why we're putting in the initial state. So the next thing is we want to return something. Render, sorry, render. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to render the state. So h1 elapsed time. However, we still need to do a little bit more. Okay, so what we need to do is, so when we talked about the life cycle, we want to set it so it changes the time, elapsed time every second, right? So we want to do call a component. So what we want to do is we created a function called tick. So every time it's called, it will change the elapsed time from add it incremented by 1 second. So what we want to do is we want to set an interval. So I'll explain what's going on. if this works. So, all right, well, let's just talk about what it's doing. So first off, it created the ticker class. So I created a function called tick, which changes the state. It just increments it by 1 second. It's pretty straightforward because we're changing the elapsed time state, and we grab the original, the last state of the elapsed time, and we add 1 to it. On the initial state, we set the elapsed time to 0 because that's the initial state of the, that's the first thing the elapsed time would be set to. So a component did not. So after it renders, what it does is it sets the interval, sets an object interval, and every 1,000 milliseconds, which is a second, it will call the tick function, which will increment the state by one. And then after the component, if we decide to like turn off or whatever, it will clear the interval and it will reset. And right now, what it's doing is it's returning the interval by. It's returning the elapsed time. Return the elapsed time. Or we could do this does state should work as well. Cool. All right. Any questions on what happened? Make sense? Yeah.
Why are we doing this dot state not just
because this is to access the state, because it said the last time is a state, right? So to access that, it's a this dot state. That's how you would access it.
So can I make that a class level variable there? Is it create class? Or is it?
Excuse me, sorry, I can't hear you.
Can I pass the variables to the functions or something like that? Or is it?
Yeah, but I mean, you already have access to it because it's inside, like it's updating every second, right? I mean, so you already have access to it. So I don't think you need to. Makes sense? All right. Oh, sorry. So now we've seen multiple components, and we've seen implementation of single components. But the main power of React is that you could use multiple components. So has anybody used Angular before? All right. So in Angular, it's known for two-way data binding. However, in React, it generally does one-way. So what this says is that it flows unilaterally. So it flows from the parent component to the child component. And an owner is a component that sets the props of other components. So what that means is that you have in a UI, you have something like, for example, in a comment box, you have the main comment box, and then you would have the search box, the add comment box, and then you have the list of comments, right? So the main comment box would be the parent, and it would pass down properties from the parent, flow down to the child, which should be the list of comments, for example. Okay, so I'll actually just do two components. Actually, I have it ready, so I'll just go over it. So, in order to do two components, we have we set a text box. So the way it should work is, so it will make sense, is so whatever, because this is a famous Angular example. So whatever you type in, it shows up here. So the way we do this is, first we create a text box component, which is that text box, and the initial state is that the text is empty. So what it does is it will create a class div with the input type of the text, which is right here. And whenever you add something to it, what it does is it calls the change text function, which is what we define here. And what it does is it grabs the target value of whatever you typed in, and it sets the state to that. And then what it does is it calls the text mirror component, which is a component I created, and it passes that state as a prop. And if you look below, this is the prop for that. This is the text mirror component. So all it does is it renders out the this.props.text, because we're passing in the text prop on line 26, for example. So does this make sense? Yeah.
So is that done like that because of a more performance reason, so that you can specifically say you want to kind of mimic that two-way data binding on a certain element?
Yeah. So like this is just basic. You could actually do this in one component. It was a simple example to show multiple components. Generally, with React, what they recommend is kind of like you want to break the stuff down into as many components as possible. I guess that way it's reusable. And as far as performance goes, I think that was their argument. I honestly don't know. It's supposed to because but they are working on a two-way binding as well. So I don't know how it will work. So, but generally this is how they recommend doing it, because you're passing stuff down from your parent to your child. So in this case, the parent would be the text box is the parent, and the child is the text mirror. So you're passing in the prop from your parent to the child. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it just looks like a more explicit usage of data binding.
Yeah, I mean, this was just a simple example.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I think that's how they recommend it. So that should be okay with the live code. So now we just had like some dummy data and some basic applications. But in production application, in order to get the real data, you need to use something like Ajax or WebSockets or so you could actually use jQuery with React. So you could use the Ajax function from jQuery in order to get the data and bind it to this. And so if you want to continuously retrieve data, so for example, you have a dashboard where it's updating, you want to update the metrics every second. You need to either do Ajax polling or use WebSockets, and all that information would go, logic would go into the component did mount, because that's being called every time you render it. So for example, you have a dashboard that every 5 seconds it gets new data. You'd call, if you're using Ajax polling, you'd set a timeout for 5 seconds, and you would or interval, and you would call that and update the data, update the state, and then it will re-render, and then it will call that again in 5 seconds. So, so in order to extend React, there are what's called add-ons, and they're considered experimental by Facebook. So these add-ons are things like animations, two-way binding, and you could actually get them individually, but there are plans to integrate them to core React, but I don't think they have made any concrete plans. But if you look into the React docs, they have a section called add-ons, and you could kind of like play around with the experimental libraries. But so that's as far as React goes. Does anybody have a question on just React by itself? That's good? Makes sense? I mean, yeah, it might be a little confusing, or I might not be able to explain it properly, but I'll post the code up and you guys can actually experiment and play around with it. So now, what about Rails? So the React team has worked on a gem called React Rails. What it does, it handles the JSX transforms in the asset pipeline. It will convert it into JavaScript. And it also comes with generators to help you create boilerplate components, similar to how Rails scaffolding works. And also what it does is it allows you to render server-side your code, your React code. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add, this is directly from the React Rails documentation or the GitHub. So first thing you need to do is you need to add the gem, obviously. And then it will need to do a Rails generate React install. What it does, it will create a new manifest file and create a new folder, and it will set your directories properly. So, for example, you need React and then React UJS and then React require components. So we'll do this automatically. So if you just run Rails generate React install, it would set that in your Rails application. Next thing is we want to be able to change settings in the development and production environment. So in development and in production, you just go to your environment files and you set it to the correct environment settings. And next is, so in order to write JSX, what you do is you go to your components folder, the newly created components folder, and you create a .js.jsx file. You could also use CoffeeScript, and there's instructions there in the README file. But for this demo purpose, I only used the .js.jsx. And it comes with a view helper as well. So the view helper is a React component, and then you pass in the component name. So if you had a component called post or post view, whatever, you pass that in. That's your first parameter. The second one is your props. So it could accept either a static prop, or it could accept something like Rails, like a post, like an instance object. As long as you could call to JSON on it, or it's already a JSON formatted, you should be able to use it. And then the third is you pass in any kind of HTML options you want. So right here you see it says pre-render is set to true. What that does is it actually renders the server side. By default, it's false, I believe. So if you want to set it to true, it will render everything in server side. So even if the JavaScript is turned off, it will still render your application, and you'll be able to kind of see what's going on. Okay, so if you go back on the link, there is a link to a repo. So if you want to clone it, I'll show you guys the link again. Was anybody able to clone the app properly? Or anybody had trouble? Okay. So yeah, if you clone it, can you get it to run? See if you can get it to run. But all right, so I'm gonna actually just switch over to Linux. I created a really simple app. All it does is it's a scaffold. It just creates posts, and you can create a new post, for example.
That works.
Okay, cool. Yeah. All right, so successfully. So if you go back, it's re-rendered. And the thing is, if you go and view source or your element, you'd see actually the. Can you guys see that? I don't know if you can. I don't know how to increase the size of that. But it actually passes all your data into a data attribute called React class and React props. And so that's kind of how a lot of this modern JavaScript, I guess, libraries do it. So I'll walk through the code, and then hopefully it will make sense. So first thing is I create a simple scaffold, a Rails scaffold, and nothing magical. So the only thing I changed was the index. So in index, I called the. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, in the index, I called a React component called posts, and then I set my post parameter, the props to the posts instance object, and then I set pre-render to true. Now the main thing that happens is actually in assets, JavaScript, components, and post.js. So what I did was I created a posts component. So first, what I did was I set the initial state. So the initial state is whatever is being passed to my post, which was the post that was in the instance objects, right? As to render, what I did was I mapped over all the, so basically I looped over all the posts, and I returned another post component, which is for the individual posts. So what I did, I added a key for it, which is kind of a React's way of keeping track of things, and then I set a post prop to the individual post that was being passed, which is an object, and I set that to a variable called all posts, and when I rendered this post component, it renders all the components. It loops over everything, and it will render. So when it calls a post function, the post component, all I did was I just got the the post title, and then the post body. And this is rendering individual posts, and this one is rendering all of them. Does that make sense? Yeah. So does anybody have a question of how this works? No? All right, cool. So yeah, that's pretty much the magic. I mean, there's nothing, I mean, this is a very basic example, and obviously there's a lot more things you could do with it. So if you want to submit a form, for example, you need to either make an AJAX call, because honestly, like using something like the Rails form builder, I couldn't really find a way of integrating React with it. So you need to build out the form inside your components. And I think that should be it. And oh yeah, and so the future of Rails. So we're used to, a lot of us are used to building this gigantic Rails applications, monolithic applications, but they're kind of going away. So there's a trend, especially where you isolate the front end from your back end. So the JavaScript does a lot of the front end stuff. And I mean, you don't actually interact, you just have an API in the back. So Rails 5, if you guys haven't heard, it's coming up with an API-only feature, which will make integrating with foreign libraries like React and other backbones and other things a little bit easier. So that's pretty much it. So does anybody have any questions or? Yeah.
Have you tried React Native?
I have not, no. I've heard about it, but I have not. Honestly, I think like Damon said, I was originally going to give a talk about something else, but we decided to do React, and I was like, you know what, I'll learn it. So decided in the last few days or so, kind of like get React. But we actually, at work, we are converting one of our dashboards into React, so I think I'll get a little bit more exposure to that. So a lot of things that with React, I mean, it's not always like, it's good when you have a lot of data, like data that changes often. I think React is good for that. Otherwise, you don't even need it. I don't think it's a good use case, but again, it really depends on what you're comfortable with. Yeah.
To me, it seems like it's a really good replacement for kind of rolling your own integration into the DOM. I mean, just when you're constantly building little widgets, little
absolutely.
It doesn't look, I mean, it's not like a huge library to really get your head around.
Yeah, it's, I mean, the basics of it is simple. It's just the way it's a little bit different than how you're generally used to with JavaScript, especially with the JSX and stuff. It takes some time to get used to how the props and the states work with the React. But I think its best use case is the fact that you could have this reusable components, and you could just like kind of just plug it in anywhere and just set some data, and it will just do its magic. And if you look at some videos, they've done benchmarks where it was like 30-40% faster than like Angular or Ember or Backbone or things of that nature. So, but yeah, again, it has its own use case. I don't think it's good every time, my personal opinion, but if you build a lot of applications where you need to constantly update the data, and then the DOM access gets, exponentially, or it just gets really expensive, it's a good use case, so, yeah. Any other questions? No? Okay. All right, cool. So, you have a question, or? Yeah. All right, cool, thanks.
All right, so thank you, Shah. So one thing I forgot, we were going to do sponsors, and I forgot to bring Scott up here. Sorry about that, Scott.
I forgive you.
Hopefully you learned a little bit about React. But anyway, I'm going to have both sponsors come up and just do whatever they're going to do. And Scott's here from Own Local, who are sponsoring our bar tab tonight. So he's going to say a few words. Yeah.
So the first question I have is, did we actually get the beer? Is there any beer back there?
No, we do a bar tab after.
Oh, bar tab after. All right, my bad. Sorry, I have no idea what's going on. My name is Scott. I'm a software engineer with Own Local. Been there about a year and a half. They asked me to come out tonight, say a little bit about what we do, who we are. Like I said, I joined about a year and a half ago, and I love it. It's a fantastic company. We are a Rails shop. We also use Elasticsearch, and we're also building a little bit a few of our services in Go. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, please come talk to me. But some of the other perks that we have going on. We offer completely paid for healthcare. So insurance and then copay on top of that. We have an HSA, which is pretty cool. I get free Starbucks whenever I want. We have a corporate Starbucks account. That's just through the app. And then free lunch every day. And since we're out of Capital Factory, free breakfast every day too. I don't know if all of you have been back in that kitchen, but it's pretty cool. So I pay for 1 meal a day. The salaries are pretty serious. So 2 free meals and a pretty good paycheck. I don't pay for anything. I eat half my Chipotle burrito and I'm good. I eat the other half for dinner. So it's pretty cool. But we also I don't know, I guess the culture is fantastic. People that are really changing my career. OwnLocal digitizes print newspaper ads. I guess that's what I should have started with. We digitize print. Yeah, like what do you guys do? We digitize print media content and we package it up and when we sell it in a variety of ways. Our primary customers are newspapers. We currently have 3 of the top 10 newspapers in the country. We have Chicago Tribune, LA Times, and somebody else I don't remember. And totally like 1,300 papers under contract. We're hoping to have 50% of the U.S. newspaper market by the end of the year. We're on target for that. We're growing like crazy. And the people that I work with, I learn so much from every single day. It's a fantastic experience. We're social. We have a lot of really cool events. If boozing and schmoozing is your thing, we do that. If you're not, that's cool. We have a lot of people that really aren't into that either. But yeah, I guess that's the 180-second pitch.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks to OwnLocal. All right, and then Sharethrough. Diane, you want to do that? All right, Sharethrough sponsored our pizza tonight. So let's have Diane tell us a little bit about them. We're very grateful for the pizza. Thank you.
You're welcome. So my name's Diane Cessna. I'm an engineering team lead at Sharethrough. We just started an Austin office, so I moved here from San Francisco in September, and I started coming to these meetups at the beginning of the year, and everyone I've met has just been so helpful and has been introducing me to people. And it's just a really cool group, so we wanted to sponsor and show our support, and I'm sure we'll do it again sometime. But Sharethrough, we're a native advertising company, and we're a leading native advertising company, and we basically work with publishers like Time Inc. and Hearst to help them monetize their web properties and their news feeds on their websites in a way that is not obtrusive to the user. So we take high quality content that comes from our ad exchange that we run, and we display that on their websites in a way that matches the form and function of their website. And Tony actually just joined our team, and we work on the team that builds the platform that the advertisers and the publishers log into to set up their ads and their budgets and their targeting and everything like that. So yeah, we're really excited to be here and sponsor, and I'm excited to give a talk later.
What's the tech stack there?
So the team that Tony and I work on, we're all Rails and CoffeeScript, Backbone. We are doing some Marionette, but we're trying to not do that anymore. And possibly Angular soon, as long as Angular 2.0 comes out soon. But I don't really have high expectations for that. So we'll see. We're exploring new JavaScript framework. Maybe React. You never know.
All right, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Sharethrough. All right, can we bring your laptop up here too to set it up? Because I want to set up the raffle. So we're going to take a break right now. And during this part, I'm going to set up a raffle for these 2 books. So you'll come up here and put your name in if you want to. And anyone who is looking for a job right now doing Rails, could you raise your hand, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. And one per company, please. Which companies are hiring Rails right now? 2, 3, 4. Almost perfect match. You guys could just find each other and then we'd be totally good. 5? 5. 5 and 5, so there you go. So if you are looking for a job right now, you're trying to hire Rails engineers, please make your way to these lovely chairs over here, and during our break you guys can sort of meet each other and have a quick get together, and then of course there's more social time after, we can chat more, but I'll set up the raffle. Thanks. We'll probably take about 10 minutes, 10 to 15.
Are you sure? Oh, I don't know. What you got? We do. We're moving over from How's it going? All right, so hiring or looking to be hired? Looking. I'm Scott. Brooke? Okay, awesome. Nice to meet you, Brooke. Sorry? Drew. So you guys all from here originally? Or? Oh, yeah. Oh, so did you do a boot camp at Maker Square? Okay, fantastic. Is it real specific? So what are you guys interested in? Let me give you I know. So we just submitted a couple of standards. I guess it's past month. We're actually they came out, I guess they went through the transfer of they've actually been out.
Hey guys, so there's a bunch of swag over here. If you want a water bottle, a batteries, a little bag,
yeah, you know, I mean, it's really nice. The view doesn't hurt. So yeah, Rails is a must-have, and we were just kind of more desire to really pick up our things, right? So we're kind of
Alright, so if you want to be in this raffle, come up, put your name in. Unfortunately, we're completely busted on Rainbow, so we're going to do a little IRB console action.
Awesome. So you might be the
IRB action up here. Put your name in if you want to.
Yeah, it is real wood. It is that. I did all of this personally by hand. Yeah, it's exactly full time, doing a full time. But yeah, I was just like I was telling
This is good. Now we can find out who can actually title stream.
So yeah, so we're looking for Rails developers. Like I said, we use Rails last year, and we're starting to go out our service. Pleasure, right? Yeah. Scott. Nice to meet you. And did you come out of a boot camp? Okay. Cool. That's awesome. So yeah, I guess Rails, Elasticsearch as well. I'm not gonna play it's a great company. We have about 9 engineers now.
Because we're talking
but
yeah, it kind of played out there.
Yeah, but I was a support person. I was promoted just through the going. I was in Treehouse, but they're all fantastic.
I took my motorcycle here, so I'll like add it to myself.
But yeah, no, it's been a great couple So we're running Rails. We run them off of AWS, Postgres. We have Sharethrough primary apps, so we can all do we're also we're getting out of some other stuff. That's really solid stuff that we're not really looking for.
Is everybody who wants to be in the raffle already up here?
We hired a couple of
Going once? Anybody want to get in the raffle? We'll take them for the IRB console.
So basically,
raffle extravaganza.
thousands of printers and all these newspapers around the world.
If you can read the screen, you actually win the book.
So anyway,
I'm unable to read it.
but anyway,
I'd be stealing it.
Oh,
that's where it is.
I started reading
yeah, no, dude, I'm totally winging it. I have no idea what I'm doing. But yeah, I just Cage, is that right? And Drew. Okay, awesome. Oh, really?
It's like from right now.
We never.
At least you don't have expectations. It's been alright. It's been kind of slow. So we like pulled out all the Jan Rain stuff back on Monday. So we're about to run stuff.
So just to
I don't know. You seem like the kind of guy who's I like it. I try to keep a happy face. It's kind of cool. It's like it runs out of blood.
Anybody else?
So we're gonna get right. I was there for like 8 years.
Okay, so K-12.
People over there. Hey!
Oh, perfect.
You didn't even move because you won and you're standing right here. Rich R is our first winner. Alright, one more. Yay, Rich! Alright, and then one more. Okay, one more. Number 16. Hunter Lab, number 16. Okay, so you get to choose which, you get to choose which one you want. You were first, so crafting Rails or eloquent JavaScript. Alright, there you go. And then Hunter, you get to be a JavaScript expert. That's the one you wanted. It's like Christmas. Alright. Awesome. Alright, thanks.
It's like we didn't know anybody else. But it's a lot easier to like meet people. Like at the bar or whatever, you know. Even more swag. Yeah, it's you keep coming, you know, like the lottery, you're bound to be a winner eventually.
Okay, so we're going to get started here in a minute. If you want to kind of make your way to your seats, grab some more pizza, grab some soft drink. Pretty soon we'll get started, so make your way to your seats, please. Thanks.
Yeah, so it's really cool. It's been interesting to see like that's one of the problems with being like it's really cool to watch. You guys have
Maybe they have lots of Yeah, we'll have to ask about that. We should ask. I like this because I feel like the standard. I know people wander around. Yeah, check it out. Why'd you choose all that? I was going to say something down, call it down. What you guys say? Was it hard to find the position? Would you go to do? Yeah, I was that old. So it cost me $50 That's right.
Yeah, well, yeah, so what Meetup does is so they have like a database called you like enter your address and show you what so it's essentially good. You guys there's monetization of that eventually like say like hey No, so they actually did a pivot recently. They were graduating and they were doing essentially like Yelp for restaurant menus and everything because of service or restaurants on their website. And it worked out. That was like a really cool idea. It's like Torchy was doing it. Yeah, they were very recently they pivoted. So this is like React. So they got to see but they don't know.
I'm rarely good at it.
This is where like weird herding techniques are really useful. Please take your seats. Thank you. Yes, have a nice day. The sooner you sit down, the sooner we can go to the bar, says Tony Lewis. This is the way to lead. Lead us forward, Tony. All right, thank you very much for taking your seats. Appreciate it. We're going to have Diane come up. She's going to talk about continuous deployment and how they do it at Sharethrough. Should be a great talk. Thank you, appreciate it. All right, here you go.
Hello. Is there volume on this?
Louder. Make sure it's pretty close to your mouth.
Okay.
Get a good
noise level. Hello again.
Hello.
I'm going to talk to you guys about continuous deployment. We recently started doing continuous deployment at Sharethrough for all of our applications, and the hardest one for us to convert was our large Rails application. And I just wanted to talk about our experience doing that. This might, if you guys are already doing this might not be the same as what you're doing because we're only using certain tools. There are a lot of things out there that you can be using. So this is just one way, and if you have other things that you've used in the past, definitely bring that up. I'd love to hear what you guys are doing if this is similar. So what is continuous deployment? Continuous deployment is when a developer is at a hackathon and they pass out on their keyboard and they end up running the deploy script all night long. What? You guys don't believe me? Oh, you've done that before. Okay. So continuous deployment is actually when every change is automatically deployed to production as long as all of your tests are passing. A lot of times people confuse continuous deployment with continuous delivery, and sometimes they even use those interchangeably, but there is a difference. Continuous delivery it just means that you're able to deploy at any time, but continuous deployment means that you actually automatically deploy to production anytime there's a change. Some benefits of continuous deployment are that it reduces your risk when you're deploying because you're deploying smaller amounts of code each time. And you also get faster feedback from your users and your stakeholders. And most importantly, there's a lot less communication overhead that developers are dealing with, so they can spend more time developing. So what was life like at Sharethrough before we started doing this? Back in the olden days, when we only had 10 engineers, which wasn't that long ago, we would just look around the room and say, everyone good for a deploy? And everyone would give a thumbs up, and then we would do it. Sometimes we wouldn't even ask product managers or tell anyone we're doing it. It was just not a big deal. But now that our team has grown, right before we started doing continuous deployment, it was the developer would check in their changes to master, then Jenkins would run the test and deploy to staging as long as everything went well. And then sometime later, the engineer would talk to the product managers and all the engineers and make sure it was okay for them to deploy. Then product managers would have to communicate to users what changes were going to be going out if they were big changes. And then once they gave the okay, the engineer could go back and manually run the deploy script. So why did we need to change? That doesn't sound that bad. I mean, it doesn't sound great, but as our team was growing, we quickly grew to about 25 engineers, and now that we have an Austin office too, we have 2 time zones. So a lot of our engineers are in San Francisco, and then we have 3 here in Austin, and it's just gotten to be a lot of communication overhead as we've grown. Also, when the product managers are trying to decipher what features are going to be deployed, they were looking at these huge change logs of commits, and it was really hard to tell what they meant. I mean, we like to think that we're good at writing commit messages, but they don't really make sense to product managers half the time. So this was just getting pretty crazy, and we're seeing more bugs and more like accidental deploys of features that we didn't really necessarily want to go live yet. But the straw that really broke the camel's back was when we had multiple breaking database migrations, and we also had a really long database migration after those that caused us to have multiple hours of downtime in the middle of the day. And that's what really made us sit down and try to figure out what we could do to fix this. So we had a 5 whys, and we came up with the conclusion that if we would have just been deploying more often, it would have prevented all the problems we were seeing. And even if we did have the breaking migrations, our application wouldn't have been broken for as long as it did if we had been deploying more often. The problem with this was we had about 10 engineers committing to the same repo every day, and we still weren't deploying often enough. We had this little chart to tell us when it was time to deploy and that it had been too long, but basically for this repo, it was red all of the time because we were just pushing out so much code. So our second attempt to fix things was bring in an expert. We brought in a guy named Timothy Fitz. I think he lives in Austin, actually, and he's really awesome. He actually coined the term continuous deployment, and he was an early technical lead at MView, which is the company that Eric Rees co-founded, and that's where a lot of his ideas for the Lean Startup came from. So I highly recommend, if you guys are interested in looking into this, or if you have questions about it, just reach out to him. He's super nice and just really knowledgeable about all of this. And check out his blog too. It's not really updated, but there's some good stuff up there. So after talking to Timothy, we decided our first step was just to reduce risk. We decided that everyone should be committing to master, and that was a big decision. This is something we used to do a while ago, but as we got more engineers, we started doing a lot more PRs and a lot more branches, and then we would merge all this code into master at once. We decided to just commit to master and do smaller bits of code each time in each commit in order to reduce the risk in each deploy that we were doing. And what this meant was that we all needed to get more comfortable committing code that was a work in progress, rather than putting it in a branch and just committing each day and then waiting until it's perfect and then merging it to master. We needed to actually commit this code as we're working on it in small bits.
How small is small?
So we kind of just have I guess not really enforced, but we just say that if you're not committing multiple times a day, then you're probably putting too much in one commit. But it's probably even more than that. So, yeah.
Do you stage commits or test them in any way before you merge them into master? Or?
We run our tests locally.
Okay.
But
just locally? Okay.
Yeah, locally, and then we commit to master, and then it's automatically built and deployed to staging, so it does have that check too.
Okay.
We have found, though, lately we haven't been using staging as much after we started doing this because production kind of becomes your staging. It's not in staging. It's not in staging for very long before it goes to production.
How long does it take for you guys to deploy your entire app in one go?
Right now it's about 9 minutes and 20 seconds. It depends. So after we started making more commits to master, we decided to make deploys a non-event, and the easiest way for us to do this was to start using feature flags more. We were doing this before, but only for major features, and not really as much as we should. So we started using rollout in combination with the rollout UI gem, and we would do this for any new feature that users shouldn't be able to see right away. For small enhancements, we don't do it, but for most things we do. And the good thing about rollout UI is that it gives the product managers the control over when features are released, and that means that they don't really care when the code is deployed, they just worry about turning the features on. And we decided as a team that the product managers would be the only ones that touch that because we want to let them make the decision. The next step we took was adding in notifications to replace all of that manual communication that we were doing before. For us, we use Slack, so we added a lot of Slack integrations. We have Jenkins, the Jenkins integration to notify us when the build fails because we're using Jenkins for CI. And Airbreak to notify us when there are any errors in production, and we take those very seriously. So if we don't have a lot of errors in production, when we do get the notifications, we know that something is broken. And also a Capistrano integration to let us know actually what is getting deployed and the list of commits, and that's something we used to do manually. We would actually grab all of the change logs and post that into Slack and say, hey guys, is this okay? Okay, so now the next step was we automated the deploys. So what I'm gonna do now is actually push a commit to master, and then I'll finish my talk and we can go back and see all of those notifications that we have in place. And if everything goes well, you'll see the notification that it was deployed. If not, you'll see what happens. Tony and I just paired on this about 15 minutes before we left to come here, so.
What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, what's the worst that could happen? Okay.
Famous last word.
That's right.
It's like deploying on a Friday.
Yeah. Friday afternoon.
Don't do it.
Yeah. Oh.
That's the worst that could happen.
And hopefully I don't get a bunch of Slack messages because our San Francisco team is probably still working. Oh, I'm just pushing. I'm not doing any code, so we can hide this. Let me make sure it does it first. Okay. So we'll come back later. Oh wait, let me show you what it looks like now before we, so this is the bug I fixed. Can you guys see that okay? It's just on this chart, this is our platform that we work out of, and we're in demo mode, so that's why everything's blurry. This chart, it was supposed to show the numbers in dollars, but it's got 3 decimal places. So I just fixed that really quick, and this one has 4. And once it's deployed, we'll come back and see that it's fixed. Okay, so to automate the deploys, all we had to do was add a post-build action to Jenkins to actually do the deploy to production after. For us, we also deploy to staging first, so we added this after the deploy to staging. And it only does it if the build is green. So after we were doing all the automated deploys, we waited until after that to start optimizing the time it took to deploy. It can be easy to get hung up on the deploy time at first and think that you're not ready, but we made the plunge and then started tweaking our pipeline to make it better. Our deploy time used to be over 20 minutes, and the things we did were we used RSpec, and we profiled all of our tests and saw the slowest ones, but they're really not that slow. The biggest thing was our integration specs, and it was just the combination of everything together that made it all slow. So we spent some time speeding up some of the really bad ones, but the thing that really helped us was just breaking the tests up into suites and running those in parallel on Jenkins using the multi-job plugin. You can see here that we have this bakery build multi-jobs, and there are 4 suites that are in. All right, so now that we're really doing continuous deployment, the lessons we've learned throughout all of this were involve product management early and often. It's really important to make sure they're on board and they're not surprised, and that they don't feel uncomfortable with all of this. And secondly, if something breaks horribly and something goes wrong, it's not the developer's fault. It's a problem with your pipeline. So you might have not enough test coverage in a certain area, or you might have a weird process, or you're committing too much at once. It could be a variety of things, but it needs to be emphasized that it's not the developer's fault. Otherwise, everyone's going to be really scared to do this. And like I said before, if you're not committing multiple times a day, you might be putting too much code in each commit. And also, the time it takes to get a bug fix into production becomes more important, because if you commit a bug and you need to fix it really quickly, like the same thing you would do if you weren't automatically deploying to production, you would want to fix that immediately after you realize your mistake. You need to have that deploy time pretty short so that you can fix it quickly. Also, we learned that when you're doing feature flags, you need to be explicit about which features you're building need to be feature flagged. Sometimes software developers think that some things can go ahead and be released to users when the product manager thinks that maybe we should hide this for the time being. It's really good to communicate that, because not everyone's always thinks the same thing about different features. We actually use a label and pivotal tracker, and that helps us remember when to flag something. Also, if you're working on a feature that isn't really huge and you've decided that it can be automatically released to all of your users, it's better to write smaller stories. That way they can be developed piecemeal and not all at once by the developer, and it just makes it a lot easier to deploy or to release that. And don't forget to add a chore when you're planning out your iteration or writing your stories. Add a chore to remove the feature flag later so that everyone's aware that you do have that work that you need to do, and also so you don't forget, because you don't want your feature flag gem or whatever you're using, you don't want your UI to get cluttered with old features. And finally, just for us, this is our experience. It was only scary for a couple of days, and after that, it was awesome. You just don't have to do nearly as much communication to everyone about deploys as you used to. It's really freeing to do this. And also, this may or may not be true for your company. It depends on what type of software you're building, but for us, committing to master was a lot safer than we originally thought. It seemed a little scary to have 25 engineers committing to master on all of your repos, but it actually, we haven't seen any negative impact on that. And bugs are actually caught. Testing. Bugs are actually caught and fixed faster, because when you are deploying the code automatically that you just committed, and you've got air brakes set up, and you've got users reporting these bugs, immediately once you find out that there's a bug, it's most likely related to something that you recently committed, and your head is still in that code, and it's easy to jump in and fix it and get a fix deployed. And we found that productivity is increased and developers are happier. And that's not just me saying that. We're actually working with a consultancy in Ohio, and they work so closely with us that they really do feel like part of our team. And they even wrote a blog post about how their developer morale and productivity has increased after doing this. If you want to check it out, it's pretty interesting. So in summary, this is just what we went through. We started out by reducing the risk, making smaller changes to master, using feature flags to make deploys a non-event, and automating all of that communication that we used to do about deploying and failures. And then actually automating our deploy to production, and then after that, speeding up our build time. Here's just some resources. I'll put this on SlideShare and tweet it out or something. All right, so that's what we did to get to the point where we were doing continuous deployment for a Rails app. Is anyone else here doing this already? You are? What tools are you using? Are you using CodeShip or anything like that?
Are you looking at me?
Yeah, you're the only one that raised your hand, I think.
So I've got, well, it's actually a side project that I have called codetriage.com. It's linked up with Travis, so whenever the tests are green on master, it just automatically deploys to Heroku.
Cool. Yeah, Travis is awesome too. We wanted to use Travis, and I think the reason why we didn't use it was hard to do the parallel thing that we were doing. But Travis is definitely a good option.
We constantly had, so it's open source, so we constantly had people submitting bug fixes, and they'd be like, hey, there's this bug I fixed like a week ago, it's still a problem. And I'm like, sorry, I haven't deployed because it takes a long time. And then we added that, and now it's just like instantaneous.
That's awesome. Cool. Does anyone have any questions?
So do you guys have like any sort of like a code review process or any like automated means to make sure that like a new feature is actually like properly tested?
That's a really great question. We talked about that a lot before we did this, because we used to have PRs where someone would do a code review on the code before we merged it into master. And we aren't doing that now. After talking to Timothy, he convinced us that the peer reviews that we were doing before weren't as effective as we thought they were. They were really just catching maybe some stylistic things, and they weren't actually catching as many bugs as we thought they were. Because if you're looking through a large set of code, you're just kind of reading through it, and you maybe will load it up and test it out, but usually you're not doing it super thoroughly because you have a lot of work to do. And we really found it to not be as beneficial as we once thought. So now for code reviews, we don't really have anything formal, but we do pair a lot. So if we do have junior developers, we are pairing with them constantly. And if you feel like you do need that extra peer review process, I would just suggest pairing with the people that you're concerned about or something like that. Other than that, for everything else, we're just keeping an eye on master. I mean, we're just keeping up to date. I think it's been a lot easier to stay on top of what everyone's working on by just seeing the little commits come in, and I'll just check it out periodically.
Are most of your developers intermediate to senior or junior to intermediate?
I think they're probably mostly senior, but more like intermediate to senior. We usually, I think it's a good rule of thumb to do like 2 senior developers for every junior developer. So, but we don't really have that many junior developers.
Do you have any QA engineers, or were they involved in QAing any of these features?
We don't have any QA engineers. We have a lot of tests, and yeah, that's one thing that's important to us though, because the software that we build it's not really what you would call like software you would want to just move fast and break things. We do want a little bit more stable software because we work with more enterprise type customers. They're not enterprise, but they're like Forbes.com and really important people. We don't want our software to be broken when they're using it. But we haven't seen too many issues.
Does every feature get submitted or merged with the tests, or is there ever a lag in that? Are you ever pushing stuff that doesn't have tests written for it?
We have had some things. I guess recently we haven't had too many things that have went without enough tests, but that is something that has happened in the past. Like if someone was working on a large piece of code and maybe part of it's not tested as well as it should be, but that hasn't happened recently. But I think if you don't have enough tests, it'll become clear later when people are making updates to that piece of code, because you'll start seeing bugs.
How do you deal with so you mentioned database migrations earlier? Do you just like have a script that automatically runs the migrations after a deploy, or like is there ever kind of a scenario where it's like, oh no, I didn't mean to deploy that thing that's going to lock this table for like 10 hours and there's no way to undo it and like the world's ending? That was really a question.
Okay.
But database migrations, go.
Okay. We don't really have a formal process around database migrations. Only that the only major downfall we've seen is when we had a really long one, and that was really rare because we had these tables that were holding a lot of data that was just data metrics about our ads. So it was just really huge, and we were changing the length of one of the columns, and it took a really long time. So that's the kind of stuff that doesn't really happen very often. And we try not to write breaking migrations, but sometimes it happens. And I guess the good thing about that is that your deploy, anything will only be broken for a few seconds. It's not good though. We don't want to do that. Yeah.
Make sure that you always have something to be like a staged rollout to multiple servers, like one at a time.
We're not doing that right now. So that's what's interesting. You may be working with a company that has like millions of users or a lot more than us. We just have advertisers and publishers logging in to create ads, and these are like high tier publishers and advertisers, and normally they have a media agency or someone working with them, so we don't have like tens of thousands of people logging in every day. Any other questions? Oh.
Have you ever had to roll back?
We try not to roll back. Since I've been working at the company, which is almost 2 years, we have never rolled back. We would rather just fix what was wrong.
Have you ever had a problem that made the application effectively unavailable?
Yes, when we were doing the database migrations, our app was down but that was before continuous deployment.
Is that the only time?
The only major issue that we've had.
It's really what we need is for you to come back in a year.
Yeah, so this is new for us. We've been doing it since January, I think, and it's been really awesome. But I would say definitely take it slow. Don't just try to do this in one day or anything. Take it in steps, and if you don't think your company is going to be on board with it, at least try to use feature flags more often and pretend like you're going to deploy at any time, and make sure you're not just merging features into master that need to be hidden from users. Definitely try to use feature flags more often. Anything else? Yeah?
It worked.
Oh, Tony told me that it worked. Okay. Cool, let's check it out. So this is in production. Oh yeah, we have 2 places. Let me sign into Slack and I'll show you our notifications. Okay, and people are posting pictures. We have a channel just for deploys, and this is where you see all of the deploys that are happening today. Can you guys see that? So you can see just a little bit ago, we had a deploy, there was 1 commit, and it finished in 107 seconds. That's just the actual deploy to production, that's not the test. And if something would have went wrong, we would have seen a message in this alerta channel that we have. And this is our air brake channel. And you can see we have a lot of discussions here about any errors that are coming in. And then, yeah, that's basically it. Thanks. Oh yeah, also there's a lot more swag over here, so please take some water bottles and bags.
Thank you for coming, and thank you, Diane. Table migrator, if you don't want to lock your tables. Table migrator. So we're going to wrap up now, and we're going to head down to BD Riley's. It's down the hill towards 6th Street, and then take a left. Hope you'll join us for some beverages. And thanks everyone for coming. Hope you had a good time.